We stand on the precipice of the next evolution of the human experience. Disruptive technology threatens to affect our very existence, from personal and family to work and our very definition of humanity. With an ever-increasing onslaught of technology-driven tools such as generative AI, robo assistants, and always-on awareables, how can you not only survive, but thrive in an algorithmic world?
You're listening to Beyond Insights, your go-to podcast for all things accounting, business, and technology.
From cybersecurity and AI innovations to sustainability and work-life balance, we've got you covered.
We host insightful guests from different backgrounds, industries, and locations all around the world.
From this diversity of thought, we aim to find solutions to some of our most pressing business problems.
Thank you for tuning in. Let's dive right in and go beyond insights.
Hi everyone, welcome to today's episode of Beyond Insights. In this episode, we're going to be discussing the technological revolution and what it means to be human in an algorithmic world. And today I'm joined by Craig Ring. Thank you for joining us. Craig is a global speaker and AI company founder, and also, as your website says, a tour guide to tomorrow.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Alex.
Pleasure. Maybe you can just tell me a bit about yourself beyond my very brief introduction, and how you got to looking into this topic.
Sure. So, at a very high level, I'm an engineer by qualification. I did electrical engineering, and part of my final year dissertation was to create a device to assist partially sighted kids. So now I'm going to date myself here, but that was over 20 years ago. Part of that process was to say, how do I design a program? And at that stage, I was playing on the fringes of artificial intelligence already. So I was doing things like edge recognition and boundary recognition, which was a prelude for things like text-to-speech. Right? And so I started playing that area. Fast forward to where we are right now, there was a whole bunch of other interventions. I started a couple of companies. I worked at Google for a while. One of the companies that I started was a non-profit in California, working in the clean tech space. Came back to South Africa, where I was at Google. And then I've been doing this futurist work for probably over the last decade and a half, 1.5 decades. And a lot of it has been about saying, how do we think about the future differently? And specifically, if you look at something that's topical like AI, which we'll discuss today, it's around the impacts and what does it really mean? And also, how do we unpack some of the stuff? So what is what's fact, what's fiction? What do we really have to think about as business leaders to say, is this going to affect us or not? So it's really been a journey that's been filled with entrepreneurship, startups, innovation, and it's really about saying, how do we not just think about tomorrow, but how do we create that?
Awesome. Sure. That is a lot of interesting background. Really, really cool. Also interesting to hear, I don't know how long concepts like text-to-speech and AI have actually been around for. And I feel like we're only really starting to talk about them so much at the moment.
Yeah, it's the old saying, right? It's like saying, I'm a 10-year overnight success, as the saying goes.
Yes, exactly.
But AI has been around for 40, 50, 60 years. We didn't call it AI and it wasn't sexy, but even now, viewers will know this. You use AI and you have been for the last 20 years. A simple word processor that's autocorrect. That's a version of AI because it's a rules-based engine. Using Google Maps, using Waze, driving somewhere. That's that. It's really as simple as saying, what's a process, what's an algorithm that determines if this, then that conditionality.
So it's really something that we take for granted in so much of what we do today already. We
take it for granted, but not just that. I think it's also been hyped up so much. So we're now fearful of this thing that's in the zeitgeist.
Yes.
It's in our minds, and we hear AI is going to take our jobs, and AI is going to do this, and AI is going to be, it's like the old Skynet. And what's real or not? But the fact of the matter is, you've been using this for such a long time already. It really has been.
So how do you see the rise of today's AI sort of reshaping our reality? Is it this scary thing that everybody's worried about, robots taking our jobs? Is it something that's more going to be like integrated into our lives? How do you see it?
Well, so I think it's worthwhile just to go and say, what was the tipping point? And the real tipping point per se was the democratization of access to AI tools. And here I'm speaking specifically around ChatGPT, right?
Yes. So
this is about 2 years ago. So circa 2 years ago, it became publicly available. OpenAI, the company that owns and created ChatGPT, has been around for years. It's been around for well over, I think it's close to a decade now already. Right?
Oh, wow.
And at that stage, you could go on, but the process was difficult and it was harder. You had to buy tokens, you had to do this, you had to choose different kinds of engines. It was a complicated technical process. What happened is when ChatGPT became publicly available, it democratized access to certain things. Because it democratized things, the common person, the lay person, shall we say, now had the ability to have this magical technology. And as the saying goes, technology that's so advanced, it seemed like magic. So now suddenly you have this thing that's available to say, we can ask it questions about this and ask about, ask it questions about objective and subjective truth. Okay, so that's the real tipping point. How does this play out? Well, I think there's a few pieces. There's a few pieces which I'm happy to discuss also. Is for a lot of commentators, they say, when you look at how far AI has come in a relatively short space of time. So we're talking about ChatGPT, we're talking about Gemini, we're talking about Midjourney, and all these other things that have come across. And they're like, well, if you look at the progression of how quickly it's been over the last 2 years, surely it's going to change at least at the same rate, if not quicker. Therefore, if our brains follow this through, it means it's going to be some version of the future. It's going to be scary. It's going to be this. It's going to be the Skynet type thing, right? The truth of the matter, it's a lot more nuanced than that. Okay, so part of the work that I'm doing within the introduction that I missed out is also I work in the future space. And that's really about not prediction about the future, but it's about strategy. What does the future potentially look like and how do we map this out? No one can really tell us where the future is going. Okay, and this is where I will depart with a lot of contemporaries in the space. There's a lot of naysayers. It's going to take your job. It's going to do this. No one really knows. Okay, so let me give an example. 3 years ago, if we were having this conversation, we probably would have been speaking about virtual reality.
Yes.
We've probably been speaking about Facebook. Look at the rebrand to Meta. Look at how much money Zuckerberg's put in, and look at where we're going, right? And everything was Meta. You had virtual land, you had virtual this, you had currency, you had Roblox, which has done well, but everything was like, this is the next frontier, right?
It's the metaverse.
It's the metaverse. And Meta really bet 1/3 of the market cap into this. Fast forward to where we are now, 2-3 years later, where's the metaverse? Now, I'm not saying it's disappeared, but I am saying that the hype isn't as necessarily there, which could also be that it's going through the Gartner hype curve as it's coming down. But the point is that I'm trying to make is if you extrapolate stuff around where we are and where we're going to be, that's not always the truth. So where we're going to be, no one really knows. But what I will say is definitively this, is AI will affect many parts of our lives, but not in the way I think people think it will.
So do you have an idea of how you think that it will affect our lives, or is that a bit...
No. So I can give you some real thought and some real data points in terms of how it's playing out, right? So by and large, I think the question, and you've alluded to this around jobs, I think it's about saying how do we move away from the concept of jobs towards the concept of roles, right? And more importantly, not even roles, tasks. So what tasks do we have? And when we look at those tasks, what can be automated, right? So let me give an example. So if you go back 20 years, if you go back even 30 years ago, right? My mom was a secretary. She used to write shorthand. I don't know if you've ever seen shorthand before. It's
long time ago.
It's super old school.
Yeah.
It's like dashes and dots, and it's a whole alphabet, and she could write all that kind of stuff out, right? So when you look at what happened is email and word processors made her obsolete because no one needs the shorthand stuff anymore, right? So what we see is you see that AI has the ability to automate certain micro tasks like shorthand into word processing. Without a doubt, AI is going to automate some of those back-end processes of things that many of the listeners and viewers today already are using it for. It's around stuff like baseline creativity stuff. Give me some ideas for this. It's around things like help me think about some ideas for that thing, right? Tell me how I can write a story with these kinds of plot lines. The micro tasks are already being used by AI and will continue to be so. But there's a piece around humanness and human intuition that is not going to be easily replaced, if ever. So without a doubt, one of the ways it's going to play out is to say, how do we look at tasks versus whole jobs? And then how do you use tools like generative AI to boost productivity? There was an incredible piece of research that was done by Harvard and MIT. And basically what they said is, if you look at the lower quartile of knowledge workers, by using generative AI, they can boost their productivity by 42%. Ginormous number, ginormous. But on the other end, even if you're in the top quartile, you can improve your performance by 12%. Okay, now that's really important because why is it happening? It's because when you think about AI driven by LLMs, large language models, right? LLMs essentially, and I can explain this more if you like, but AIs today driven by LLMs give us the most likely truth, not the truth. So if you think about a normal distribution, a Gaussian distribution, if you will, right? What AI does, it's saying, how do we give you the most likely answer of something that you're looking for? So even the word GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. It's a statistical engine. It's a statistical measure where it goes in and says, let's have a look at the question. Statistically, what is the most right answer? And so it gives you the mean of the curve. So call it the mean within one standard deviation to be super duper geeky, right? But if you've got a binomial distribution, it gives you the bulk of that curve. Okay, so that's how the majority of AIs operate today. Consequently, what that means is when you use something like a GPT or Gemini or any of these other things, it gives you the most likely, not the actual.
Yes.
Which means if you're on the extremities, it means you're likely not going to be replaced. Here's the thing. It's always been that way. If you're average in your job, no matter what it is, you've always been at the most likelihood of being replaced. It's just been accelerated.
And on that idea of it giving you the most likely form of truth, I know my colleague was asking me about this the other day. Sometimes ChatGPT doesn't seem to be very good at maths, for example. And she was saying when it's looking at the most likely answer, how accurate does it end up being? And yeah, I guess on the mathematical level, I kind of expected that it would be good at maths. I don't know, because this is my stereotypical idea of computers.
Yeah, and versus absolute and not, right? So there's also a logic gate that goes through the background. So remember, the way that all these GPTs are done is it gets trained off a certain data set. And the data set, it then says, here's this, so it goes through a process of understanding the data, hence scraping of data is a big thing, right, around data privacy. And we've seen the narrative around in the media organizations saying we don't want our data to be scraped, or how do we stop this if there's bots going through. Conversely, you've seen the big tech guys say we're running out of data. We need to feed this machine more data.
Yes.
Because the thinking is the higher, the better the data, both in terms of purity and quality, the better the output of this thing. Because we're trying to map out what do we know to be true, or what we think to be true, and then this AI interface, this little layer, this piece, this membrane, then goes and tries to say, if it has the absolute answer, we'll give you the absolute answer. If not, we'll give you the most likely answer. So what's ongoing with mathematics is really interesting. If it's a basic 2 + 2 is 4, okay, that's very easy. But some of the things become, specifically when you start to get to high levels of maths, it becomes interpretive data. How do you interpret that data, right? Then we start getting to things like hallucinations. So you've heard the term hallucinations, which was actually the 2023 Collins word of the day, word of the year, because it was about hallucinations.
Yes.
So what is it doing? It's giving you the most likely thing, right? So if, for example, if I were to say to you, who was the 27th president of the United States? Here's the answer. We know what the answer. But if you say, who was the best president? Well, now that's subjective on what metric, right? Now the problem is people might be confused with best in totality, or best in terms of rating, in terms of economic growth, in terms of job creation, in terms of whatever the metric may be, right? And they're taking that thing as absolute. So there's many examples, one of which was a lawyer. I'm sure you probably saw that case study where there's a real lawyer. He goes and he uses ChatGPT as a way to prepare for court cases.
Yes.
Okay, so you saw that. And so you went to ChatGPT, you typed the stuff out, and ChatGPT gives them the most likely answer, not the actual answer, based off the data. So this is actually how it works, right? And it happens it's the same way in academia. So within the world of academia, we know about citations, and we know about all that kind of issues, right? So citation, typically the format that it follows is the name of author, date, name of publication, so name of paper, and then publication and some version thereof, right? So what a GPT would do is would go and say, let's assume, give me an area that you're interested in. What's something that you...
Literature.
Okay, so literature, right? So we want to find out about the development of, or the influence, and I'm making this up over here. We want to find out about the influence of Roman linguistics within English. Let's broadly, right? So that's what we want. Right? So you go to ChatGPT and say, give me some data that helps me understand the influence of this. It'll make up information. So it'll say, who is the foremost literature expert that has an influence in Roman whatever, right? Backgrounds. It'll come through and say, okay, cool, it's Black. Black was at its peak, at her peak between 1995 and 2000, because she generated 300 papers during this period of time, right? Who was the second one? Well, it was white. White was coincided not between 1995, but between 93 and 98. So there's an overlap period. So therefore, the two most likely authors are black and white. Okay, so now we got that one. We see the date because it's an overlay, so we'll put in 1997. We'll make up a title that fits into what you just said. So it'll be the influence of Roman characters and numerology that led to the development of whatever. So it makes that title up. It then says, based off the data that we have, there is a real literature paper, okay, let's assuming there's one, called The Origins of Language. So that's the one. It'll then give you a page number, give you a journal, and it'll also give you a DOI number, which it all makes up.
Wow. I think this comes to the point, well, something I can imagine, say a student is looking up this topic and they find this and they think, great, it's referenced it for me, it's maybe written a nice paragraph for me for my essay, and then they don't go and fact check anything because they just assume, ChatGPT is really smart, I'm going to use that. Meanwhile, this has been hallucinated. So the thing that's missing, I think, is actually that critical analysis.
Yeah, it's the human analysis, and it's the ability to go and say, what does this really mean for me, right? So first of all, in your example, let's just check this reference. In the case of the lawyer, obviously too lazy to go to the library and pull out these different things, right? But it's legal work, it's case history, it's all this other kind of stuff, right? But you can also use it to find out, again, a likely truth. So Notebook LLM, one which I haven't spoken about before, I'm sure you know about that, right? It's really awesome because you essentially have a workspace, shall we say, where you can upload your own documents and you can then ask it questions, and it's almost like you've created your own AI. So while it might not be correct from a broad spectrum, there's other use cases where you can ask an AI around your specific documents. So what this lawyer could have done is you could have gotten real documents, like real case law, real precedents, real stuff, chucked it into Notebook LLM, and then said, based off these documents which are real, now use the AI, you're the one that Google's given us, and give us some kind of legal arguments for this case.
So it's also about knowing how to use AI, knowing what its limitations are, and knowing where your own skills come into play. Although the one thing, a question that I thought of when you were saying, you're going to upload all of these legal documents, the kind of ethics around that, if it's sort of private information of your clients or previous cases, what then happens when you're feeding this data into this machine?
I had exactly this question at a conference last week, and the gentleman said, what if you put this data up? How do you know? How do you know it's not going to be used for me? How do you know? And I said to him, first of all, you don't. Right? So one is, and I say this absolutely, we don't. And we see cases of this all the time. We see all the big tech guys get pulled out for this. We've seen data leaks in South Africa as well. We see them around the banks. We've seen them around the credit unions, right? Even though you say this is the case, and it may be the case, it doesn't stop them or doesn't prevent any kind of extrusion and intrusion. So that might happen that even if you protect as much as you can, it doesn't safeguard you forever, right? So that's number one. But the point that I made to this gentleman, and his question was framed slightly differently. His question was, if I put company documents in there, he said in his words, and I verbatim, upload company documents, but I've seen that information appear somewhere else online, right? How do I safeguard that from happening? Almost similar to your question. I said the question is wrong. And I said, I'll tell you why the question is wrong. As an example, if you look at the big 4 banks in South Africa, maybe big 5 if you include Capitec, maybe 6 if you include Discovery, right? But if you look at the traditional 4 big banks, honestly and truly, what's the difference in strategy between the 4 of them? There is none. The strategy is almost the same. Why? Because the people churn, they have the same consultants, they go to the same conferences, they share the same kind of best practices. So your competitive edge very quickly gets diluted into the marketplace. Now your argument about, but Craig, we're different. At SIFT, we've got some magic stuff, we've got some stuff in the secret sauce. It's completely proprietary, right? Even if somehow an engineer would leak that, they take those secrets to someone else. How do you prevent that? Now you might say, well, maybe in the world of patents, we can do that. Maybe copyright law. The problem is patents, for argument's sake, amongst the various things that I did some patent law stuff for a while, right? And IP law. I speak on the international conference every year. The issue with patents isn't the patent, it's the defendability of that. And this is where things become problematic. It's like saying, here's a piece of grass. Keep off the grass. I put a sign that says, keep off the grass. That's the patent. If you are 6'4" and you step on the grass, I can't stop a 6'4" guy stepping on my patch of grass. I can stop him if I've got a 6'6" friend or brother. But if I don't, it's pointless. And that's the challenge with patents. Because not only is it costly legally, but most folks don't realize there's no such thing as a worldwide patent, so you have to designate the countries. And if it gets infringed upon a country that you have designated, so if you haven't designated the country, you can't claim it. But even if you have claimed it, you have to fly to that country, that jurisdiction under their law and defend it, right? So the question that you have around saying, how do I know the data that I've uploaded isn't being used? One, you don't. Two, even if you do, how do you defend it? And I think there's a bigger question that needs to be asked around that. For me, these kinds of questions are addressed through speed, around execution and speed. So can I do this thing quicker and faster and add more value than anyone else before they can? That's how you build up a true differentiator.
So in the sense that you've put the information out there, but it's able to help you very quickly and provide a lot more value than if you had tried sort of traditional means of researching.
Yeah, that's one way of looking at it, right? So how to extract value, but like all of these conversations, it's not value that you espouse, it's real value to the end client, to the end customer. So have I given them and have I created a better solution for them on whatever value driver it might be?
Right. I'm going to look at some of my actual
questions
that I'd written. I suppose we touched a little bit on the idea of technology replacing jobs. It's something we talk about a lot on the podcast in general. But I wanted to know, because you mentioned augmenting humanness, what do you mean by this term?
Yeah, it's really interesting, right? So take a step back, a little bit more, perhaps outside of tech, but from an evolutionary point of view. When you look at the development of species, I'm going to be a little bit controversial because not all the listeners, viewers may believe in evolution, but be it as it may, right? So when you look at the evolution of species, when we moved all the way through from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens, all that kind of stuff, right? Essentially, we were governed by the size and the density of our brain. That's a pre-evolutionary point of view, right? Until we reached the upper limit of where we are right now. So your brain was governed by how big and how dense stuff was. Then we had these things. We had cell phones. And suddenly our brain, or rather our capacity for learning, went beyond what was inside my cranium towards the extensions, right? So we're already augmented beings, but we don't like to say this because a lot of people live life here, right? So we rely on this stuff and the connections to this to say where we go. So we're already augmented, make no mistake about it. And it's not just augmentation here. It could be argued that glasses are augmentation, pacemakers are augmentation, smartwatches are augmentation, right? So we're already being augmented. What AI in today's form allows us to do is it allows us to say, well, how do we create systems and processes that are not only automatic, but they're bidistributional and by data flow, right? So we augment our humanness with technology. What does it mean practically? Practically, it means let AI and technology, but in the context of the conversation, let AI do the stuff that it's better at doing than us as humans, right? So it's much better at cranking data. AI is much better at having a look at large data sets, at finding things that we might be able to see from the data itself. It's very good at using it as a creative tool for a first pass, but it won't replace us as seeing what is true art, right? So how do you use it to do a first pass of reporting? To let it do a first pass of this fictional essay that you spoke about, right? Then the human judgment goes and it customizes it for my course, for my school, for the business folks out there. Let it do analysis around your business if you want to give it business plan stuff. For the financial folks, give it the data, give it all your cash flow statements, your income statements, all those financial documents, and say, give me analysis of this. Then take that data and double check that, and we'll use it to say, well, I hadn't thought about this. How do we go from there? So the augmentation piece is really about saying, not about replacement, but it's about saying, let's use technology in a way that is more efficient, that allows the human being to be more human, not less human. And that's a really important piece. There's not many people speaking about that, right? It's about the humanity and it's about being more human, not less human, that gives us a competitive edge. There's another saying from Alice in Wonderland. She goes back to Wonderland the second time around. She goes through the looking glass and she meets someone there called the Red Queen. And the Red Queen says, it takes all the running you can do to stay in the same place. If you want to get anywhere, you have to run twice as quickly. What it means is the Red Queen theory, as has been told right now, is that the world we're in right now is moving so quickly, to get anywhere you have to run twice as quickly as that. But it also means that everyone else has the same access to the tools as you have. So everyone's running as quickly as you are. Therefore, and this is where I'm sure you've heard the same before, AI is not taking your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will.
Yes.
Basically, someone who has augmented their job with AI is more of a danger than the person.
I'm interested in the idea of AI making us more human, or the kind of topic of today, how do we retain our humanity in this sort of AI-driven, technological-driven world? So
let me give you an example. There was, so often when I spoke to people and I present around the world, they say to me, but Craig, show me the data. And there's one specific paper that was controversial that came out, it came out a year ago. I think it was in April last year. Essentially the parameters of this research study, it's an academic study, so it's not a whatever, right? And it was done with John Hopkins, and I think it was Harvard. And they compared it was a blind test, but they compared responses both from doctors and a GPT. And they measured them on two areas. The first was quality of response, and the second was empathy of response. So how empathetic were you? They did the analysis, and then they went back to the audience and said, now go rate this and see where it came through. Both quality and empathy was higher with the GPT. So quality of care was 3.6 times higher than the human being. But scarily, empathy was 10 times more. Okay? So the argument that people use there, they say, that is the reason why technology is going to take our jobs. I push back and I go, that's why we need more empathetic doctors. Because when you think about the best doctors today, they're not the best doctors who can necessarily diagnose you the best. They're the ones with the best bedside manner.
Yes. When
you have a terrible diagnosis, they hold your hand. When a loved one dies, they're with you there. When they go through terrible times, they walk you through the process. We can see this. It's called the placebo effect, right? So it's not the best diagnosticians, right? The people that do that. It's the people that are the most able to connect with you on a human level. That's what it means. It means that how can I connect to you in a different level that's beyond the technology, like this case study shows us.
And I guess even if we're becoming sort of cyborgs, we have all of our technology sort of strapped to us, using it for everything. It's also then to see, to find the gaps. If we see that somehow a robot is showing more empathy, what can we do to improve our own sense of empathy?
Yeah, your point is valid. We're already cyborgs, right? This is already a cyborg.
Yeah.
But this conversation, yes, you can have it online and Zoom and Skype and and all this other kind of stuff, but you don't have the human connection. We know this. The question is, and it's a bigger question, the question is, are human beings essentially just programmed from a chemical perspective? Because empathy and all those can be a result of chemical responses in our body, right? So that's a different conversation. But the point is there, and the point that I want to drive home for our listeners and viewers is technology should be making you more human, which means connecting with your colleagues, with your family, with people in society, not less. We see the issues through COVID. And one of the big issues through COVID was people stopped this human interaction because of the laws and the processes that were imposed upon us. But the unintended consequences of that were higher rates of depression, suicide, mental health, because we didn't have the human connection. That's a signal, as they say in the futures era. It's a weak signal, maybe even a strong signal, right, of what happens if you take people out of interaction with other people.
Yeah, I think this is a really massive topic. I'm afraid we can't carry on forever. But I think to wrap up here, we are all already cyborgs, so no use being scared of AI coming and taking over. AI is already part of everything that we do. And it's just about finding ways to help it make you an augmented human, to find ways that you can hone in on those truly human parts of yourself and work with technology.
Absolutely, Alex. You summed it perfectly. I couldn't say more. Safe to say from my side is again this is the interaction. This humanness is the most important thing. But thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining, and thank you so much for watching.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.